What happens when one of the most outspoken figures in American politics sits down with one of journalism's sharpest interviewers and neither one is willing to back down? The cameras were rolling, the questions were flying, and what started as a routine interview quickly spiraled into one of the most explosive on-air confrontations ever captured. Before we get into exactly what went down in that studio, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on in this clash. Because trust me, you're going to have an opinion by the end of this. The interview was set up weeks in advance. Donald Trump had agreed to sit down with Couric for what was supposed to be a straightforward conversation about his views on current policy issues and his plans moving forward. The network had promoted it heavily and anticipation was building. This wasn't going to be a softball interview. Everyone knew that. Couric had built her reputation on asking the tough questions, the ones that made politicians squirm in their seats. And Trump, well, he had never been one to shy away from confrontation. In fact, he seemed to thrive on it. The studio was set up with two chairs facing each other at a slight angle. Close enough to create intimacy, but positioned so both could address the camera. The lighting was perfect, the crew had done multiple checks, and everything was ready to go. Trump arrived with his usual entourage. Shaking hands with crew members and chatting briefly before taking his seat. He looked confident, relaxed, even, adjusting his tie and settling into the chair like he owned the place. Couric came in moments later, professional as always, carrying her notes and offering a polite smile as she took her position across from him. The interview began smoothly enough. Couric opened with a few general questions about Trump's daily routine and his perspective on how things were going. Trump answered with his characteristic style, expansive and confident, occasionally gesturing with his hands to emphasize points. He talked about his accomplishments, the things he was proud of, and his vision for the future. Couric nodded along, jotting down notes, letting him speak without interruption. To anyone watching, it seemed like it was going to be a standard political interview. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then, Couric shifted gears. She leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious, and asked her first pointed question. You've made a lot of statements over the years that have been fact-checked and found to be inaccurate. How do you respond to critics who say you have a problem with the truth? Trump's demeanor changed instantly. The relaxed posture tightened, his eyes narrowed just a fraction, and his jaw set in that way that anyone who had watched him knew meant he was about to push back hard. First of all, Katie, I don't have a problem with the truth. I have a problem with the fake news media constantly twisting everything I say. You talk about fact-checkers, but who checks the fact-checkers? These are people with agendas. People who don't like me, who never liked me, and they're looking for any excuse to make me look bad. Couric didn't miss a beat. But these aren't just opinion pieces. These are verifiable facts, numbers, statistics, direct quotes that have been documented. Are you saying that all of these independent organizations are coordinating to discredit you? I'm saying that there's a bias, Katie, a huge bias, and you know it. You've been in this business long enough to see how it works. The media picks a target and they go after them relentlessly. They take things out of context. They focus on tiny details while ignoring the big picture and they create narratives that fit their agenda. That's what's happening here. Couric shuffled her notes, glancing down briefly before meeting his eyes again. Let's talk specifics, then. You claim that a certain economic policy resulted in numbers that multiple economists have said are simply not accurate. When confronted with the actual data, you double down. Why not just acknowledge the error and move forward? Trump leaned back in his chair, spreading his hands, because it's not an error. That's why I have my sources, very good sources, people who know what they're talking about. Just because some economist with a degree from some fancy university disagrees, doesn't make me wrong. These academics, they live in ivory towers, they don't understand the real world, the way business actually works. I've built an empire, Katie. I've created thousands of jobs. I've made deals that these economists couldn't even dream of. So, when they tell me I'm wrong, excuse me if I don't, just roll over and accept it. But this isn't about business deals. This is about factual accuracy and public discourse. When you hold a position of influence, don't you have a responsibility to ensure that what you're telling people is true? I absolutely have that responsibility and I take it very seriously. What I don't accept is this idea that only certain people get to decide what's true and what isn't. The establishment, the mainstream media, they think they have a monopoly on truth. They don't. The American people are smart. They can think for themselves and they can see through the nonsense that gets pushed as fact. Couric's expression remained neutral, but there was a sharpness in her voice now. So, you're positioning yourself as the alternative to established facts. That's a concerning precedent to set. No, I'm positioning myself as someone who tells it like it is without filtering everything through the lens of political correctness and media bias. People appreciate that, Katie. They're tired of politicians who say one thing and do another, who hide behind carefully crafted statements that don't mean anything. I speak plainly. I speak honestly. And if that ruffles some feathers, so be it. The tension in the room was palpable now. Crew members who had been casually monitoring the interview were now paying full attention. This wasn't going according to the script anyone had imagined. Couric pressed forward, her questions becoming more direct, more challenging. She brought up controversial statements Trump had made, asking him to clarify or explain them. Each time Trump pushed back, sometimes answering the question, sometimes deflecting, always maintaining that he was being unfairly targeted. You've called various media outlets enemies of the people. That's pretty strong language. Do you stand by that? When they lie, when they distort, when they push narratives that are designed to harm rather than inform, yes, I stand by it. Look, Katie, I'm not saying all media is bad. There are good journalists out there, people who try to be fair. But there's also a lot of garbage, a lot of deliberate misinformation, and someone needs to call it out. If that makes me unpopular with the media elite, I can live with that. But don't you see how attacking the press undermines democratic institutions? A free press is essential to democracy. A free press, yes, absolutely. A dishonest press, no. There's a difference, and it's an important one. I support journalism, real journalism, where people investigate and report facts without bias. What I don't support is activism disguised as journalism, where reporters have already decided what story they want to tell before they even start investigating. Couric took a breath, visibly recalibrating. Let's move to another topic. Your communication style has been described as divisive. Do you think you could achieve more by being more conciliatory? By trying to build bridges rather than walls? Metaphorically speaking? Trump actually smiled at this, but it wasn't a warm smile. You know what's divisive, Katie? The people who refuse to accept results they don't like. The people who spend years trying to undermine and obstruct rather than working together. I've reached out. I've tried to work with people across the aisle. But when you're dealing with individuals who have made it their mission to oppose everything you do, regardless of merit, being conciliatory doesn't get you anywhere. Sometimes you have to fight. But fighting creates more division, doesn't it? It entrenches people in their positions rather than finding common ground. Or it forces issues into the open where they can be dealt with honestly. I'd rather have an honest fight about real disagreements than fake unity where nothing actually gets accomplished. The American people didn't elect me to make everyone feel good. They elected me to get things done. And sometimes that means confrontation. The interview continued in this vein, with Couric asking probing questions and Trump responding with increasing frustration. What had started as a controlled exchange was becoming something else entirely. A battle of wills playing out in real time. Couric could sense the shift in energy, but she wasn't backing down. If anything, Trump's defensiveness seemed to embolden her. She flipped to another page in her notes, her eyes scanning quickly before she looked up again. You mentioned confrontation. Let's talk about your approach to foreign policy. Critics say your style has damaged relationships with longtime allies. How do you respond to that? Trump shifted in his seat, his hand cutting through the air dismissively. Our so-called allies have been taking advantage of us for decades. Katie, decades. They've been getting a free ride on defense, on trade, on everything. And nobody had the guts to say anything about it because they were too worried about hurting feelings. I came in and I said, this isn't fair. This isn't right. And we need to renegotiate these deals. And you know what? It worked. We got better terms. We saved American taxpayers billions of dollars. And yes, some people got upset about it. But my job isn't to make foreign leaders happy. My job is to put America first. But diplomacy requires relationships built on trust and mutual respect. If you burn those bridges, doesn't that make it harder to accomplish your goals in the long run? You don't burn bridges by being honest, Katie. You burn bridges by lying. By making promises you don't keep, by being weak. I've been very clear about where I stand, what I expect, and what I'm willing to do. That's not burning bridges. That's being a strong negotiator. These world leaders, they respect strength. They don't respect people who roll over and let themselves be pushed around. Couric leaned forward, her voice taking on a sharper edge. But there's a difference between strength and aggression, isn't there? Between being firm and being antagonistic. What you call antagonistic, I call being direct. Look, I've been in negotiations my entire life. High-stakes deals with tough people. And I know what works. You don't go into a negotiation acting like you need the other person more than they need you. You establish your position. You make your demands clear and you don't back down. That's how you get results. Even if it alienates people, even if it creates instability. Trump's eyes flashed with irritation. You keep using these loaded words. Alienate, instability, antagonistic. What you're describing as instability, I call disruption of a broken system. The old way wasn't working, Katie. It wasn't working for American workers. It wasn't working for American businesses. It wasn't working for American interests. So, yes, I disrupted it. And yes, some people who benefited from the old broken system are upset about that. But that doesn't make it wrong. Couric paused, letting his words hang in the air for a moment. Then she pivoted. Let's talk about your rhetoric towards specific groups. You've been accused of using language that emboldens extremists. Do you believe you have any responsibility for how your words are interpreted and acted upon? Trump's face wrinkled slightly, his voice rising. Here we go. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're trying to hold me responsible for what other people do, for how they interpret things. I can't control what's in someone else's mind, Katie. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. If someone twists it into something else, that's on them, not me. But words have power, especially when they come from someone in a position of authority. Don't you think you should be more careful about the messages you send? I'm very careful about my messages. What I'm not is politically correct. I don't waste time worrying about whether every single word is going to offend someone because guess what? No matter what you say, someone's going to be offended. That's the world we live in now. Everyone's looking for reasons to be outraged. I refuse to play that game. Couric's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This isn't about political correctness. This is about basic decency and the impact of inflammatory rhetoric. Inflammatory to who, Katie? To you, to the media, to people who were never going to support me anyway. The people who actually listen to what I say, who attend my rallies, who voted for me, they understand exactly what I mean. They're not confused. They're not misinterpreting anything. It's only the media and the political establishment that pretends not to understand. So, you're saying the responsibility lies entirely with the listener, not at all with the speaker. I'm saying that I'm not going to censor myself or water down my message because some people want to twist it into something it's not. I speak to millions of people, Katie, directly without a filter, and they appreciate that authenticity. They're tired of politicians who focus group every word, who never say anything real or meaningful because they're too afraid of the reaction. Couric shifted tactics again. You mentioned your rallies. There have been incidents at these events, confrontations, violence. Even do you feel any responsibility for the atmosphere that's created at these gatherings? Trump's response was immediate and forceful. First of all, the violence when it happens is usually started by protesters who come in to disrupt. These are people who don't want to hear what I have to say, who don't want my supporters to be able to gather peacefully. They're the ones causing problems, not us. My supporters are patriots. They're good people who love their country, and they have every right to assemble without being harassed. But there have been documented cases of your supporters initiating confrontations of you yourself, encouraging them to act aggressively toward protesters. That's a complete mischaracterization and you know it. What I've said is that people should defend themselves, that they shouldn't let themselves be pushed around. That's not encouraging violence. That's encouraging people to stand up for themselves. There's a big difference, is there? When you tell a crowd to rough someone up, or that you'll pay their legal fees if they hit someone, how is that not encouraging violence? Trump pointed at her, his voice sharp. You're taking things out of context, which is exactly what I said the media does. Those were specific situations where protesters were being violent, where they were attacking people. I was saying that Americans have a right to defend themselves. But of course, you leave out that context and make it sound like I'm just randomly encouraging people to hurt each other. That's dishonest journalism, Katie. Couric didn't flinch. I'm reading your direct quotes. These are your words, not mine. Read them all you want. But if you're not going to include the context, if you're not going to explain what was actually happening in those moments, then yes, you're being dishonest. You're creating a false narrative. The temperature in the studio seemed to rise with every exchange. Couric pressed forward relentlessly. Let's talk about accountability. When things go wrong, when policies don't work out as planned, when mistakes are made, you tend to blame others rather than taking responsibility yourself. Why is that? Trump's response was quick, defensive. That's not true. I take responsibility for my decisions. What I don't do is take responsibility for things that aren't my fault or for situations I inherited that were already disasters. When I came into this, Katie, there were problems everywhere. Huge problems. Problems that had been ignored or mishandled for years. I've been fixing those problems, cleaning up other people's messes. And yes, sometimes that means pointing out who created the mess in the first place. But even your own policies, when they face criticism or don't achieve the promised results, you deflect. You blame the media. You blame your political opponents. You blame what you call the deep state. At what point do you own the outcomes? I own them every day. Every single day, I'm working to make things better, to fix what's broken, to deliver on my promises. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I operate in a vacuum, that there aren't forces actively working against me at every turn. That's reality, Katie. That's what I'm dealing with. And pointing that out isn't a flexion. It's being honest about the obstacles. Core's expression remained steady, almost neutral. But her questions kept coming. You talk about forces working against you. Some would say that's a persecution complex, that you see yourself as a victim when you're actually one of the most powerful people in the world. Trump leaned forward, his voice intense. It's not about being a victim. It's about calling out what's really happening. You have entrenched bureaucrats who don't like change, who don't like being held accountable, who leak to the press and sabotage policies they disagree with. You have political opponents who would rather see me fail than see the country succeed. These aren't conspiracy theories, Katie. These are facts. This is what I deal with every single day. Or perhaps these are public servants who have legitimate concerns about your approach, your temperament, your decisions. Have you considered that the resistance you face might be justified? No, I haven't considered that, because it's not justified. What's justified is demanding excellence, demanding results, demanding that people do their jobs without letting their personal political views interfere. That's what I do. And if people can't handle that, if they can't put aside their biases and work toward the greater good, then they shouldn't be in those positions. The exchange was becoming more heated with each passing minute. Couric barely paused between questions now, and Trump's answers were growing shorter, sharper, more combative. The professional veneer that had existed at the beginning of the interview had completely evaporated. Core glanced at her notes again, then set them aside completely. She no longer needed them. Let's talk about your relationship with the truth in a broader sense. You've been caught in provable lies, documented falsehoods, yet you continue to repeat them even after they've been debunked. How do you justify that? Trump's face hardened. There you go again with the loaded language. Lies, falsehoods, what you call lies, I call differences of opinion, differences in interpretation. Just because the mainstream media says something is false doesn't make it false. They have their version of events. I have mine, and the American people can decide who they believe. But we're not talking about interpretations. We're talking about objective facts. Numbers that can be verified, events that were recorded, statements you made that are on tape. When those are proven false, and you continue to repeat them, what would you call that? I'd call it standing by what I know to be true despite a coordinated effort to discredit me. Katie, you're acting like these fact checkers are some kind of infallible authority. They're not. They're human beings with biases and agendas just like everyone else. They make mistakes. They get things wrong, and sometimes they deliberately mislead people because it fits their narrative. Couric's voice grew firmer. So your position is that reality itself is subjective, that there are no objective truths, only competing narratives. My position is that the establishment media doesn't get to be the sole arbiter of truth. You've had that power for too long, and you've abused it. You decide what's news and what isn't, what's true and what's false, who gets heard and who gets silenced. That era is over. People have other sources of information now. They can make up their own minds, and they don't need you to tell them what to think. But those other sources you're referring to often spread misinformation. Conspiracy theories, content that's designed to manipulate rather than inform, doesn't that concern you? Trump waved his hand dismissively. And the mainstream media doesn't manipulate. Come on, Katie. Every single day there are stories that are spun, that are framed in ways designed to make me look bad, that leave out crucial context or facts that don't support the narrative. You want to talk about manipulation? Let's talk about that. We're talking about you right now. About your track record with factual accuracy. Can you name a single instance where you've been wrong and admitted it? I've been wrong about people, about trusting people who turned out to be disloyal or incompetent. I've admitted that many times. But you're not asking about that. You're asking me to validate your narrative that I'm some kind of serial liar, and I'm not going to do that because it's not true. Couric leaned back slightly, her eyes never leaving his face. You've surrounded yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear rather than what you need to hear. Doesn't that concern you? Doesn't that create a dangerous echo chamber? I surround myself with people who are loyal, who share my vision, who are committed to the same goals I am. That's not an echo chamber. That's called having a team. What you're suggesting is that I should fill my administration with people who disagree with me, who undermine me, who leak to the press. That's not how you run an effective organization, but dissenting voices. People who challenge your assumptions. Aren't those valuable? Don't they help you make better decisions? I get plenty of dissenting voices, Katie. Believe me, I hear from critics every single day, constantly, endlessly. What I don't need is to have those critics inside my own tent working against me. There's a difference between healthy debate and sabotage. Couric pressed on. Let's talk about your finances. You've refused to release certain documents that every other person in your position has released. What are you hiding? Trump's eyes flashed with anger. I'm not hiding anything. This is such a tired attack. I've been more transparent than anyone. I've disclosed everything I'm required to disclose by law. What you're really asking is why won't I give my political enemies ammunition to use against me? And the answer is because I'm not stupid. Transparency isn't about giving enemies ammunition. It's about public accountability. The American people have a right to know about potential conflicts of interest. The American people knew exactly what they were getting when they elected me. They knew I was a businessman. They knew I had extensive holdings. They knew all of it. And they elected me anyway because they trusted me to fight for them. This obsession with my finances is just another attempt by the media and my political opponents to find something, anything, they can use to attack me, or it's a legitimate concern about whether your personal interests are influencing your public decisions. Can you honestly say there's never been a conflict? I can honestly say that every decision I make is based on what's best for this country. Period. My personal interests don't enter into it. I didn't need this job, Katie. I had a great life before all of this. I did this because I love my country and I saw it going in the wrong direction. So, this narrative that I'm somehow enriching myself or making decisions based on personal gain is offensive and completely false. Couric shifted her weight, her voice taking on an even sharper tone. You say you love your country, yet you've made statements that seem to show more affection for authoritarian leaders than for democratic allies. You've praised dictators while criticizing fellow democracies. How do you explain that? Trump's face reddened further. This is such a dishonest framing. When I say something positive about a foreign leader, I'm being diplomatic. I'm trying to build a relationship that benefits America. But the media takes those comments and twists them into something sinister. Meanwhile, when I criticize allies who aren't pulling their weight or who are taking advantage of us, suddenly I'm the bad guy. It's a no-win situation created by people like you who are determined to paint everything I do in the worst possible light. But you've gone beyond diplomacy. You've expressed admiration for the way these authoritarian leaders operate, for their strength, for their control. That's concerning to people who value democracy. What I admire is effectiveness, is the ability to get things done without being paralyzed by bureaucracy and political correctness. That doesn't mean I want to be a dictator, Katie, no matter how much you want to suggest that. It means I want to be effective to cut through the nonsense and deliver results. But you take those comments and you create this false narrative that I'm anti-democratic, which is ridiculous. Is it ridiculous? You've questioned election results. You've attacked democratic institutions. You've suggested that rules and norms shouldn't apply to you. How is that not anti-democratic? Trump stood up suddenly, his microphone shifting as he moved. The sudden motion startled everyone in the studio. You know what, Katie? I've had enough of this. This isn't an interview. This is a hit job. You invited me here under the pretense of having a fair conversation. And instead you've spent the entire time attacking me, mischaracterizing everything I say, pushing false narratives. I'm done with this. Couric remained seated, her voice calm but firm. I'm asking you legitimate questions that millions of people want answered. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe that's the real issue here. Tough questions. Trump's voice rose. These aren't tough questions. They're accusations dressed up as questions. You've already made up your mind about me, you and everyone else in the mainstream media. You're not interested in the truth. You're interested in confirming your biases. Well, I don't have to sit here and be insulted. I've given you plenty of time. I've answered your questions, and all you've done is twist everything to fit your predetermined narrative. I'm quoting your own words back to you. If that feels like an attack, perhaps you should reconsider the words you choose. Trump pointed at her, his voice sharp and angry. No, you're taking my words out of context, which is what you people always do. You clip sound bites, you ignore explanations, you strip away nuance, and then you act shocked when I call you out on it. This is exactly why people don't trust the media anymore, Katie. This right here, this is why your ratings are in the tank, why nobody believes you anymore. Couric's expression remained composed. Our ratings are fine and attacking the messenger doesn't change the substance of the questions. Are you going to answer them or are you going to continue deflecting? I've been answering your questions for the past hour and you haven't liked a single answer because they don't fit your narrative. You want me to admit I'm wrong, to apologize, to validate every criticism that's ever been made of me. That's not going to happen. I stand by my record. I stand by my decisions. And I'm not going to sit here and let you twist everything into something it's not. Then what are you going to do? Trump shouted. So that's exactly how one of the most anticipated political interviews turned into one of the most dramatic walkouts in television history. Two strong personalities, neither willing to back down, clashing over fundamental questions about truth, accountability, and the role of media in democracy. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below with your answer to this question. Who do you think handled this situation better and why?